Hello again, everyone. It is Gordon Majak here, back with another episode of Timeless Pop, Rock, and Soul. And just as was the case yesterday with Melissa Manchester in Midnight Blue, where we went back to 1975 for that little nugget, once again we are returning to the spring and summer of 1975. And I have to tell you, folks, I have sort of an extra special fondness for this song and this artist. And that is because when I look at this album cover and I think of this song and I hear this song especially, it takes me straight. I have a direct connection mentally, emotionally, spiritually, musically, just such a powerful musical connection to exactly where I was and what I did and all the many hours, and I mean hours, that I put in on this album and this artist and this song back there in the day when these guys first came on the scene in the spring of 1975. And there is so much. I'm going to have to really struggle to keep this episode under control time-wise because, man, so many memories when I see this album cover. This is Ambrosia's first album from 1975. Now, Ambrosia, you may be more familiar with. Here we have the four original members of Ambrosia, their greatest lineup, of course. We have Christopher North on the keyboards and vocals, quite a talented individual in his own right. Next to him there we have Joe Puerta on bass and vocals. Joe Puerta, man, I'll tell you, I tried to dabble in the bass guitar a little bit back in the day there when these guys were around. Joe Puerta, a monster bass player, such a tasty player, and quite an accomplished singer, both lead and background vocalist as well. Next to him, we have Burley Drummond, and man, talk about an underrated and just really overlooked great drummer from those days. Burley Drummond, who also did some background vocals for the band. And there on the end, for me, it's the guy who is what this whole story is all about, and that is the great David Pack. On guitars and some keyboards, and of course some incredible, stellar lead vocals and background vocals, the multi-talented David Pack. And you may recognize David better from this picture a little bit later on in his career. Man, if I had what I wouldn't give to have a sliver of this brother's talent, of his talent. We'll get to that in just a second. I'll tell you, man, why I have so much respect for this guy and just what an awesome musician this guy has always been. David Pack out in front of Ambrosia. Here we go, 1975. I'll tell you, 1975, as I have said many times on this program, one of those years there in the 60s and 70s where there was such an insane, ridiculous amount of great music coming out almost constantly. It was just one album and one artist after another. If I went through the list just in my little collection of some of the great records that came out in 1975. We'd be here for 20 minutes just going album after album. It was that amazing back there in the day, folks. And if you were back there and of the age that I was, you remember it right, very well, right? I was about, 17 there in 1975. And so there was just a ton of great music already on the scene. But for me, listening to the FM radio, and I remember hearing a song there in the spring of 75, a song called Holdin' On to Yesterday. I remember hearing that on the FM radio. I remember the first time I heard it late at night on an FM radio, and I just thought, wow, who is this artist? This is just unbelievable. And of course, the DJs say it's a brand new band called Ambrosia. And after hearing the song maybe only 2 or 3 more times in the days that followed that first hearing of it, hearing it a few more times, starting to get played a little bit more regularly on the FM radio, I went straight out and bought that album. And that was the beginning of my very long and very happy relationship with the music of Ambrosia. I spent so much time back there in 1975, even amidst all of that other incredible music that was out, and the list is a mile long. I'll tell you, there was like 3 albums in particular that I spent so much time with and went way, way deep into there in that summer of 75. And this was one of them, Ambrosia's first album with Holding On to Yesterday. Earth, Wind, and Fire's album, That's the Way of the World, that was another one that was just so big for me. And the third one that I would name above all the others would have been the Eagles' One of These Nights album. And so for Earth, Wind, and Fire and the Eagles, and you put Ambrosia in that mix, this was a group and an album and a song that I became very familiar with very quickly because I was just sort of blown away when these guys first came on the scene there in 1975. Now, I mentioned the individual members' talents, and it's no joke, man. Ambrosia, back there in the day, we had a thing called prog, progressive prog rock, right? And you had all these great prog bands like Yes and Genesis and Gentle Giant, and King Crimson was getting going back then. And it turns out one of the few things that I didn't know just off the top of my head, despite my long and deep relationship with Ambrosia, one of the few things that I didn't know about Ambrosia is that they had formed in 1970. So it took them 5 years to actually get that first album out there. They jumped around from, I think they switched record labels at some point in that process before they finally came out with this first album. But certainly they were influenced by all those great prog bands that I mentioned and more, I'm sure. But also a very powerful influence by the Beatles on the musicians in Ambrosia, among many other genres of music, I would say, including some elements of soul and even just a very polished and progressive pop approach to music, not in a Steely Dan sort of way, but more in almost that prog or almost even fusion-y way. The members of Ambrosia, some very, very gifted musicians. No joke with these guys, man. You think about how great some of those other players were in those prog bands back in the 70s. Those bands are all just full of superstar musicians. And I'll tell you what, Ambrosia may have never had the sort of long-term prog cred that those other artists did, in part because they eventually ended up having a number of huge hits on the pop and adult contemporary side, which I'll get to in just a second. But don't fool yourself, man. These guys came out of the gate, and it was always the case, no matter what particular style of music they were putting out at any given time. This first album there in 75, and I think for the next 5 years there, between 75 and 80, those first 4 or 5 albums, they had so many great songs on those albums. But the musicianship was a constant. These guys are some real, serious, heavyweight musicians. Christopher North on the keyboards, Burley Drummond on the drums. Joe Puerta on the bass is just a beast. That guy is so good. And as I said, the incredible David Pack out in front on the vocals and guitar. Now, let's talk about David Pack, man, before I hit this song, because this dude right here, so talented in so many ways. Let's just talk about David Pack as a composer. If you tell me as a composer that my 3 best songs, and I'm just going to inject my personal opinion here, if I'm a composer in this day and age and you tell me my 3 best songs that I've written are Holding On to Yesterday, this one that we're going to hear, You're the Only Woman, and How Much I Feel, 3 David Pack classics right there. You tell me those are the 3 best things I ever did, I'm telling you, you are in some rare air, because each of those songs, and even more of David Pack's catalog, really just incredible compositions. This guy, not only a super gifted arranger and sort of producer in his own way of his own songs, but just such a great writer when it comes right down to it. Such catchy melodies, the way he maneuvers his melodies and parts throughout these songs is just remarkable. As a guitar player, he may be one of the most underrated and most overlooked guitarists of that time, because I always found David Pack to just be an absolutely superb guitarist on any number of levels, and he flexes some pretty big guitar muscles on this song, as you'll hear here in a second. And perhaps most of all, in addition to being a great composer, no doubt about that, his songs are just, some of his songs, his best stuff is just unbelievably good, unbelievably high quality pop, rock, and soul music. A great writer, a great guitarist. I'd kill to have his guitar chops. And then on top of that, David Pack, one of the most gifted vocalists I think that we have heard, certainly since the time that they came on the scene back there in 1975. This is a guy that's got vocal technique and vocal chops and range and ability and phrasing. All the technical ability in the world, but so much soul. This brother is a soul man at heart. David Pack just has that ability to sing straight from his heart, straight from his soul. He can sing his lyrics, and get inside his lyrics and just project such great emotional depth. And he's got all the talent and all the chops and all the vocal facility to basically do just about anything he wants with that voice. And boy, I'm not sure. There are not all that many triple threats in the league of David Pack, despite whatever success he may or may not have had, or whatever regard he's held in these days. I don't know. I think he's pretty well respected by people who know the score and were aware of Ambrosia back there in the day. But just an incredible talent and somebody that I have always had so much admiration and respect for. You go back to that first album. I mean, first of all, the whole band is just incredible on this first record. But David Pack's performance on this album, just vocally and, as I said, as a writer, as a guitarist, I mean, just guys don't just show up on the scene with that talent. Like he had and like his bandmates had back there in 1975. And right in the middle of all that other incredible music that was coming out, Ambrosia lands, and boy, it sounds fantastic. I think Alan Parsons has got his fingerprints on this as far as making it sound really good, because I know he did go on and produce their next record, their second record. So I think Alan Parsons had a hand in the mixing and engineering of this record. I'm sure that's one reason why it sounds incredible. But perhaps the biggest reason, just the level of talent in this band. These four guys, such a great blend of talents and such a significant amount of talent. And it's readily on display in this song. There's so much cool shit going on in this song. I don't even know where to tell you to focus first. But all I can say is David Pack's guitar solo on this song, and his guitar solo again on the outro before the song ends. Just to my ears, some of the most legendary stuff that I can recall hearing here in these last, 30, 40, 50 years since the FM radio was sort of the thing back there. In 1975 for me, as far as a way of discovering great new music like this. From 1975, it is Ambrosia and Holding On to Yesterday. And man, that summer, I could tell you some stories and some memories of where I went and what I did listening to this album in the background. What a year and what a record. Holding On to Yesterday. Come on, David Pack, let's hear it. Come on. Listen to that bass line. The dynamics are just off the chart. Listen to this. That is genius guitar playing. God. These vocals. David Pack. I mean, that Ambrosia album that summer, I'll tell you, man, I went out and bought that album after hearing this song on the FM side there just a couple times. And I was all over that album, man. I had that album memorized. And just what a splash. What a great intro for the world of music. And Ambrosia just comes out of nowhere there in 1975. And like I said, man, I think of all the incredible classic albums that were coming out and that were already out there in 1975, and Ambrosia kind of comes out of nowhere, gets a little bit of traction on the FM radio there. This was not a huge hit song. Their big hits, of course, didn't come till later, and that's when David Pack got How Much I Feel up to number 3. The Biggest Part of Me, another top 3 hit there in 1980, and then another one of my personal favorites, a great tune, You're the Only Woman, another top 15 hit for Ambrosia. So this incredible introduction, they come on the scene there in 75, and it's not that Holding On to Yesterday was such a big hit on the pop radio side, because it wasn't, but that in no way, to me, is indicative of just the incredible power and majesty and just the quality of the performance from top to bottom that these guys put together. And you can sort of hear just the incredible mix by Alan Parsons there. And these guys as players, like I said, are no joke, man. That was a serious lineup. Those 4 guys there in the original lineup for Ambrosia, and blessed to have a guy out front that could sing like David Pack. My God, what a voice this guy has. Man, and when he was young, he still sounds great, even at this point. But man, back there in the day, that's quite a vocalist, and not even to mention his ridiculous talents as a guitarist. That solo is one of my all-time favorite guitar solos. I think I hear I think I hear a few influences in there. I'm not going to drop any names, but I think you fellow guitar players, well, I'm not a guitar player, but I think you, if you're a fellow guitar player of David Pack, perhaps you recognize a few of his influences there in that incredible solo, man. What off the chart chops for David Pack and Ambrosia, holding on to yesterday, man. Summer of 75, my main man, Mike Sloat, and I out in Mike's boat. We did that out in Lake Washington and out there in the Sound, out there in Shoal Bay a few times there in the summer of 75. And I'll tell you, this album, this first Ambrosia album, the Earth, Wind, and Fire album, That's the Way of the World, the Eagles, One of These Nights album, oh yeah, we wore those 3 records in particular. 3 tapes. We wore those babies out there on our evening boat trips in the summer of 75. Ambrosia, that first record, track it down. You won't be disappointed. It's pretty proggy in spots, but still, I think, very accessible. And just the quality of the musical performances, the vocals, everything is on track, on target throughout that record. Just a great first album. And man, holding on to yesterday, leading the charge. Not a bad first shot right there for their first single, right? David Pack, Joe Puerta, Burley Drummond, and Christopher North, Ambrosia. And of course, as I said, they went on to do some other great things in the years after. And we will be definitely getting to some of those songs in future episodes. Hope you enjoyed Ambrosia. Man, I went a long time in this one, but I can't help it, man. That summer, that album and that summer, unforgettable. See you in the next one, folks. Wow, great album.